Right now, there's a clock somewhere in your head. You're counting down to lunch, to Friday, to the end of a day you just have to get through. For almost the entire history of our species, nobody had a day to get through. No boss, no shift, no Monday. And before you start envying them, it's not what you think. They weren't bored, and they weren't fighting to survive every second either. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what stole your free time and who to blame. When you picture a day in the Stone Age, you probably see one of two things. Either a miserable creature shivering in the dark, waiting to be eaten, or a bored brute with nothing to do but grunt at rocks. One version is all terror. The other is all emptiness. Both are wrong. And the real one is going to annoy you. In 1968, an anthropologist named Richard Lee did something almost nobody had bothered to do. He went to the Kalahari Desert, found a group of hunter-gatherers called the Juhoansi, and just timed them. How many hours did they actually spend getting food? About 15. Not 15 a day, 15 a week. Other researchers ran the same kind of study in other places. The numbers kept landing in the same range, 15 to 20 hours. Read that again, slowly, from inside your work week. People with no tools, no farms, no paycheck, no supermarket worked less than you do. And this isn't some lost prehistoric guess. There are people living almost exactly this way right now. The Hadza in northern Tanzania still hunt and gather the way humans did for hundreds of thousands of years. An anthropologist named Frank Marlowe spent years alongside them, measuring their days down to the hour. Same answer. A few hours of foraging, and the rest of the day belongs to you. So if they weren't working, what were they doing? Start with the food, because even that surprises people. You've seen the picture. The mighty hunter, spear raised, bringing down a mammoth. That happened, but it wasn't dinner most nights. Hunting is unreliable. You can chase an animal all day and come home with nothing. What actually fed the group, day after day, was gathering. Roots, nuts, berries, seeds, fruit, eggs, honey, small game. And in most groups, that steady supply came mostly from the women. The dramatic hunt got the glory. The quiet gathering kept everyone alive. That doesn't mean the hunting was simple work. It was the opposite. It was the hardest thinking they did all week. A good hunter read the ground like a page. A bent blade of grass, a cooling track, a shift in the wind. This was problem solving at the edge of survival. And they were extraordinary at it. We like to imagine they were stupid. They were running calculations we'd need a degree to describe. But the hunt was a morning, not a lifetime. So what filled all those open hours? The answer is everything we now have to schedule. They talked, constantly. They told the same stories over and over, and each telling got a little sharper. Those stories weren't just entertainment, they were the library. Where the water was, which plants healed and which ones killed, what your grandparents survived. There was no writing, so everything anyone knew had to live inside someone's head. They made things, slowly, by hand. A single spear point could take hours of careful chipping. A net, a basket, a string of beads, a patched skin. There was no rush, because the work and the day were the same size. They groomed each other the way every social primate does. Touch wasn't a luxury. It was how the group stayed a group. And yes, they gossiped. We treat gossip like a flaw. To them, it was infrastructure. In a group where your life depended on the people around you, you needed to know exactly who they were, who shared, who cheated, who could be trusted with a child, or a weapon or a secret. Gossip was how a band of people policed itself with no police. And the children? No school, no homework, no schedule, no test. They learned the only way humans really learn, by watching, copying, and being bored enough to invent their own games. A child in that world spent years just paying attention. By the time they grew up, they knew their entire world by heart. Which brings up the question you're probably already asking. Didn't they get bored out of their minds? Sometimes, sure. But boredom the way you feel it, that itch, that reach for your phone, is partly a modern invention. When doing nothing is normal, it stops being uncomfortable. They could sit, they could rest, they could stare at the horizon for an hour and feel fine about it. That's a skill we've almost completely lost. And it wasn't all stillness. They danced, they sang, they played. In a cave in Germany, archaeologists found a flute carved from a bird's bone, around 40,000 years old. 40,000 years ago, with predators somewhere out in the dark, someone sat down and made music. Not because they had to, because being human was never only about surviving. An anthropologist named Marshall Salins gave all of this a name. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not because they had a lot, because they wanted very little and got it easily. There are two ways to be rich. You can own everything you could possibly want, or you can want almost nothing at all. They lived the second way. They didn't even know it was a choice. We have a word for an adult who works a few hours and rests for the rest of the day. We call them lazy. They would have just called it being alive. So what happened? If this life was so easy, why are you reading this on a break you had to earn? About 12,000 years ago, in a few corners of the world, humans figured out farming. And it sounds like the moment everything got better. It wasn't. A field is not a forest. It has to be cleared, planted, watered, weeded, guarded, harvested, and stored. It doesn't care that you're tired. It doesn't care that it's the weekend. For the first time, humans had work that simply did not end. And we can prove it hurt, because we have the bones. Dig up the skeletons of the first farmers and lay them next to the foragers who came before. The farmers are in worse shape. They're shorter. Their teeth are full of cavities because their diet collapsed down to a few starchy crops. Their bones show more disease, more stress, more wear from the same motions repeated for a lifetime. The scientist Jared Diamond called farming the worst mistake in the history of the human race. We traded a short week and a strong body for a full storehouse and an aching back. So here's the part that should bother you. If farming made life harder, why did it win? Because a field, for all its misery, feeds more mouths than a forest. More food meant more children. More children meant more mouths. More mouths meant you needed even more food. And once a people grew that large, they could never go back. You cannot feed a town by foraging. Farming didn't win because it was better. It won because it trapped us, one harvest at a time. And it brought friends. With stored grain came something brand new, surplus, things you could hoard, things someone could take, things worth guarding, counting, and owning. That's where it starts. Property, wealth, the big house and the empty one beside it, the boss and the people who worked for him, the quota, the schedule, and eventually the 8-hour day. The free afternoon didn't just vanish. We slowly, deliberately replaced it with work. So here's the insulting part. The thing you spend your whole life chasing, free time, slow mornings, a day that's actually your own. That was never the dream. For most of human history, that was just an ordinary afternoon. We didn't invent leisure. We inherited it, and then we farmed it away. The countdown in your head, the clock you keep checking, the day you're trying to get through, all of that is new. The old thing, the one your body was actually built for, was a morning of work and an afternoon of just being a person. So the next time you catch yourself staring at the clock, waiting for it to finally be over, remember that for 200,000 years, nobody was waiting. They were already living it.